Okay, so I have already begun the process for the rich cardamom yeast dough. I've gathered my mise en place that I'll show you in a moment. And what I've done is started on the proof of the yeast, which we've done for the last couple of weeks, mixing the warm liquid with the dry active yeast and a little bit of sugar to make sure it comes to life. I hope you guys can see that. It's nice and bubbly. It's been sitting here for a few minutes. It's ready to move forward. So the one thing that I did a little differently with this recipe, you don't have to do it, but it's a step that makes you a little more efficient in the kitchen, which is I took my mixing bowl from the stand mixer. I warmed it in my oven for just a moment to get it a little bit warmer than room temperature, so it's a nice warm environment. And then after I warmed my milk to mix with the yeast and the sugar, I added the milk to the warm mixing bowl and put the sugar and the yeast directly in here. So essentially what I'm doing is foregoing a intermediary step of proofing the yeast in a separate container. Okay, so now this just makes you, like I said, a little more efficient, a little less dirty dishes, and a little quicker in the kitchen. So now that that's ready to go, what I'm gonna do is add 4 ounces of flour to it. Now let me show you, I have my quantity, 10.5 ounces of flour, the entire quantity that I'm gonna use for the whole recipe. What we wanna do is pull out 4 ounces of that to add to our proofed yeast. So for this, it doesn't have to be exactly 4 ounces. You can eyeball it if you want, but I'm just simply going to measure it in a separate container on my scale, get up close to 4. Okay, and then get my scale out of the way. I want you guys to see this. I'm gonna add that to my proofed yeast. Okay. Now I can put this on the mixer with the dough hook and let it stir. If you like, you can just use a spoon and stir it by hand. But since I'm going to be using the dough hook for the rest of the procedure, I'm gonna do that again, just to be efficient. The dough hook in a very liquid mixture like this, it takes a little bit to get that flour mixed in. So I'll show it to you in just a minute. What I might do, let it mix, turn the mixer off, use my rubber spatula, get it inside the bowl to help push all the dry flour into the middle. Then I'm going to turn it on again. When you do this, you want to make sure you scrape your spatula on the side of the bowl so you're not losing any of the product. Put your mixer back up, turn it on. It's a little high, I'll turn it down. Okay, there is some dry flour. Let me do this. Again, using my rubber spatula, clean the dough hook off. You can stand your dough hook up on the counter so it stays clean. I think it would balance, it usually does. I guess not. Sorry about that. Put it down. I'm just turning the flour in. Okay, there we have it. Now, this is essentially a sponge that we talked about in class. I'm going to let it ferment. The only difference between a true sponge and what we're doing here is, so you can see it right there. With a real sponge, you would want to let it ferment until it doubles in size, so 2 times the volume. I'm not going to let it go that long. I think about 1.5 times. It might just take 10 or 15 minutes. And so then we'll be ready to proceed. So I'm going to leave this like that. I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to set that aside to let it ferment. So what I'd like to do in the meantime is show you a couple more things that I think of as we go, to make you efficient bakers in the kitchen. I wanted to take a moment to touch on the parchment paper that you were given in your food bags. I believe everybody was given about 20 sheets of parchment paper, which should be more than enough to last you for the semester. Okay, so the parchment comes in what we would call full sheets. This is the size that would fit a full sheet pan if we were at school and we were using the commercial kitchens. At home, at most, anybody, the largest they would probably have is the half sheet pan. Okay, so the way I do this so that we're not wasting parchment paper, fold it in half. I use a long serrated knife. Put it in. Whoop. That didn't go as planned, sorry about that. Even though it tears, we don't have to waste that. So now my full piece of parchment paper is cut in half so we can use it for 2 different sheets, okay? So this, I guess basically what I'm saying is don't just fold your parchment paper in half and use it as a double sheet for all your baking projects, or you might run out for the semester. Okay, so that's that. And then the other thing I wanted to show you, my mise en place that I got ready for this recipe. Okay, so I had all my ingredients measured. Like I said, I've already taken from the flour. We'll continue to use that. But a couple other tools that are going to be important for this project. The offset spatula, again, just always have that on hand when you're baking. I almost use it for everything. Because we're doing the bread dough, the flexible rubber spatula will come in handy. And then later, if you are making cinnamon rolls, the bench scraper will be handy for cutting the dough. Okay, so that's it for now. And as soon as our sponge is ready to go, we'll continue on. Okay, we're ready to continue on with the mix. So my sponge has grown in size. I actually put it back in the slightly warm oven to keep the whole environment warm, but it took about 10 minutes. So what I'm gonna do now is add, I have the flour minus the 2 ounces of flour that I'm supposed to reserve. Okay, so I have that aside. So this is approximately 4 more ounces, 4.5 more ounces. I'm gonna add the rest of the dry ingredients to the flour, which would be the sugar, my cardamom, and my salt. And just using the offset spatula, give that a stir to evenly distribute all the dry ingredients before it goes into the dough. It just gives it a little bit of a head start of a mix. Okay, so into my bowl, my dry ingredients and 1 egg. Okay, by the way, these plastic pint containers and half pint containers and quart containers that we're getting our ingredients provided to us in our food bags are super, super handy in the kitchen for scaling out ingredients. Hang on to them, I recommend them. Okay, so now bowl back on the mixer, dough hook. Raise the bowl, start on low speed. Turn it up one notch, and I'm gonna turn that so maybe you guys can see it. Let that start to mix. As soon as all the dry ingredients are incorporated, I'm going to add the melted butter, and then I have my reserved 2 ounces of flour, which I'm going to add as needed. Again, using the rubber spatula, I'm going to push the dry down. Sort of gives the dough hook a little bit of a head start. Again, as the dough comes together, you might notice if you're using the stand mixer that the dough starts to creep up the hook. That's again when I use my rubber spatula, push it back down off the dough hook, get it in the bottom of the bowl, and turn it on again. If it creeps up the dough hook, it's just not gonna mix, it's just gonna keep turning on the hook. If you're doing this by hand, sorry about the interruption. If you're doing this by hand, you're going to mimic the kneading motion that the dough hook is doing, and you're just gonna do it on your work surface the way I showed you using the palms of your hand. Okay, so now that this is just about together, I'm going to add my melted butter, and I'm gonna pour it in while the mixer's on low speed. If you do this, again, don't get your fingers anywhere near the moving attachment, but you wanna pour the butter in so it kind of lands on top of the dough. And again, use your rubber spatula. Make sure you get all the melted butter in your dough and you're not missing out on any of it. Okay, so now your dough is going to look quite greasy from the added butter. It is going to need some flour. So using my 2 ounces of flour, I'm going to start with about half the quantity